Hello and welcome to the next instalment in our series of fireside chats, and I'm thrilled to be joined today by our preacher for the Trinity Sunday Eucharist, pre-recorded at St Paul's Cathedral, Sale, by the Dean of the Cathedral, the Very Revd Susanna Pain. Welcome, Susanna.
Thank you.
And we've even got the Cathedral cat with us this morning, Annie. We'll explain her name in a moment, but she may wander across the field of vision from time to time. All God's creatures, as you mentioned in your fine sermon this morning. So speaking of Annie, Susanna, your great-grandfather, Arthur Pain, was the first bishop of the Diocese of Gippsland. And in fact we had the 118th anniversary of his consecration just in recent weeks, back in 1902 when the diocese was formed, and you opened the new deanery, which was the Annie Pain Kindergarten Hall some 30 years ago, and now you live in that place which bears your name, and there's a plaque with your name on it there and with your great-grandfather's name, of course. Tell us a little bit about what it's like coming into a leadership role, a senior leadership role in a diocese that your forebears helped to establish.
Oh, it's an unusual thing. I've been back for various different events. I preached at the ordination of the first woman preacher. I've preached at a youth synod. I've spoken at a clergy conference. I've led retreats. And then coming back to live in a house named after my great-grandmother, which I opened 13 years ago, is unusual. So coming here with that connection, if distant, is really special and important. And one thing I pondered as I was thinking of coming here, I had Arthur Wellesley Pain's photo there with me as I was discerning the call to come here. And then coming here, I've been thinking about my great-grandmother who brought up lots of children, looked after other people's children, was here in the diocese with a man who I think was quite strict and quite severe at times, and who was very good at law and ecclesiology and stuff. But coming from such a long way away to be here, there's a lot to ponder on, and to go to Bishop's Court where they lived.
There's that lovely photo of them in the hallway near the main staircase, and I was looking at it this morning and really noticed for the first time that Arthur and Annie were born within a year of each other and died in the same year. Yeah. Incredible.
Yeah, she was Australian through and through, and her father and her mother both were from, her mother was from Tasmania, so her forebears lived in Tasmania for quite a while, and then she moved up to Sydney and lived in what's now Rose Bay Convent, Kincoble, which was her father's property, and met this clergyman who came out from England just so that he wouldn't die, because he had TB, I think, or something like that. And most of his family had died, so interesting. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, wonderful heritage. Susanna, tell us a little bit about the role of a dean. The Cathedral Parish here is an interesting one, of course, because it was established in 1884 as still then part of the Diocese of Melbourne, as the kind of parish church of Sale with its out centres. And then when Gippsland became a diocese, along with the other provincial dioceses in 1902, it took on the new identity as the Cathedral Church for the diocese. So your role is kind of a twofold one as Dean of this particular cathedral. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, it has those two parts to it. There's the parish, which is Sale and Kilmany and Golden Beach and Locksport. So it has those branch churches. It's looking after the people, caring for the people, being involved in civil events locally, and then there's the engagement with the diocese and responsibility, so being on Bishop in Council, being on the diocesan staff team, and more recently on the diocesan executive, and being on the board of Gippsland Grammar, having a bigger picture of the diocese, seeing how we as a cathedral can serve the diocese through good liturgy, through pastoral care, through offering the things that we offer to people beyond sale. So, for example, one of my passions is ongoing learning. So we've had a number of New Testament scholars, theologians, artists coming and speaking, and we've had workshops which people have come to at the cathedral from different places. We've had Merbu North came and had a service with us and had a tour of the cathedral, which was great. We also have the services, for example, for Lady Day, for Mothers Union, and
ordinations.
Yeah, well, I'll get on to those.
Sorry.
Ordinations, synod services, various things. Anam Cara, annual services. So it's a gathering place for the broader community. And then in these last few months, of course, recording services that are there for those who would like to be part of them and need them and are unable to attend church because of the coronavirus.
And how have you found that exercise of pre-recording our Sunday services during the week? I think it's one that we started with no one present, just a very small handful of us, and gradually people are able to come back and participate in it as gathered worship. But what's that process been like for you, and what do you think we might be learning through that experience?
It was strange at first, and I think we've been learning as we go along. There's been, initially I think there was 3 or 4 of us or something. But there's always that sense that we're there with others, that we're not alone, that people are going to watch it, that people are watching it, and then as we go along we get feedback from people saying, thank you so much for doing that. Thanks for so much for your ministry to us. And then knowing that there are people beyond the Diocese of Gippsland who are watching it regularly, people in Canberra and Sydney and Melbourne, and that we can minister in this simple way. I know it takes time, your time and the registrar's time, which is very valuable, but it's a great unifying ministry, I think, for this time.
Yeah, and thank you again for your hospitality of it. It's great to be able to offer that, as you say, locally and more broadly as well. Do you think there's a place for some kind of online liturgical offering as we move forward through this kind of period?
Oh, that's a good question. I think we'll know the answer to that as time goes on. Yeah. One of the things that I've been involved in since March, every day, morning and evening, is Zoom services. So each morning at 8:15 we have Christian meditation online. And this morning we had, I think, 9 people, 2 from Canberra, 1 from Warragul. I think today the rest of them were from Sale, and we meditate in silence every day. And then in the evening at 5:30 every day we have evening prayer via Zoom. And again we're getting about 15 people. And we have people, Colin, who read in church today, Colin and Carol, who live in Denison and wouldn't be able to get there at 5:30. Alicia, who lives near Warragul, Amanda, who is in the Southern Highlands of New South Wales, and Ruth, who's in Canberra, join us every day. Anne Rance, who's a deacon in Canberra, joins us every day for evening prayer. And we have to decide what we're going to do in the future. Yeah. And I think that there is a place for online worship, both in that daily sense, in the small things, but for the Eucharist as well, perhaps. Because many people can't get there in the morning. It's too early for them. But that means maybe we look at different times to worship. But it seems to be meeting a need now. How it goes into the future, I don't know. But certainly in terms of meditation and evening prayer, we would at least be doing some days via Zoom, I think.
Yeah. Well, it's been a joy to share in that kind of work with you. And Yeah, I think that's right. I think a certain openness to where it might be leading us and what it might be teaching us is what we need to hold on to, isn't it? Susanna, in your sermon this morning, you touched on a situation that's unfolding in the United States at the moment, very distressing kind of outpouring, overflowing of all sorts of frustrations and anger. And it's a theme we touched on, this idea of how we struggle as human beings to live with difference. And, you know, we touched on it last week too, with reference to Reconciliation Week. And your own journey to ordination was also one that had to navigate some of these same issues with respect to gender. It was a tumultuous time and a rocky journey in many respects, even given the wonderful spiritual heritage in which you stand. And you shared that in parallel with Archbishop Kay Goldsworthy too. Can you tell us a little bit about what that was like for you?
Well, one thing that I remember is being interviewed on the radio in Adelaide when I was first in Adelaide. I was being interviewed alongside a priest who was against women's ordination. So he strongly and prayerfully believed that women's ordination was not on, and I strongly and prayerfully believed that it was. And that really caused me to think, you know, is he wrong? Am I wrong? Are we both wrong? Does it matter? Is God saying one thing to one person and one thing to another? Or does it matter? Oh, darling, you're hot. So, yeah, it was a long journey, a painful journey with lots of time to reflect and to think. Bishop Owen Dowling felt called to push the boundaries a little and not to wait for General Synod, and he said that he would ordain us on the 2nd of February 1992. So we were in the media a lot. I was chaplain at a youth synod in Hobart when it went to the Supreme Court of New South Wales. And we went on retreat before the ordination at Bishop's Court in Goulburn, and we didn't know whether we were going to be ordained or not. And on the Friday, we heard that it had been stopped, our ordination had been stopped by a Supreme Court injunction from the New South Wales Supreme Court, because some people had taken to court to say, and how could they do that? Because somehow the churches and what happens in churches comes under state legislation. So we heard that it wasn't going to happen. Bishop Owen said, I can't do it. So I went down the street and bought some chips and some chocolate, and then the ABC 7:30 report rang, and they flew in by helicopter, and that evening they asked us, they went around the circle of everyone present and asked us how we were feeling. I mean, that's amazing to do that, to listen to all those 12 women and several men.
It's like you said in your sermon, close our mouth and open our ears and listen.
Yeah. So, and then...
Do you remember what you said?
I have no idea.
Yeah.
I have no idea, but I do know that on the next day, the day which was going to be the ordination, there was a march. People marked, and people had come from all over the world because it was the first women that were going to be ordained in Australia. And I remember, the photographers were there, the news were there, and they took pictures of me going like this, and there was a picture. And then the ordination went ahead for the men. For the women, it went to the first question was, do you believe you're called to be ordained in the Anglican Church of Australia? I do. We said, yes. And then we had to sit down, and then the men were ordained, and we weren't. And there was a big picture in the Canberra Times of me in tears. The next day, I moved to Adelaide. I was to have been priest in charge, but I went as deacon in charge of the parish. And at my installation. There were, I think, 2 television stations filming. I was on the news and in the paper every couple of weeks.
Wow.
And then years later, when I moved to Sydney, I moved to St James King Street. I had to go as a deacon and not as a priest. And again, I was in the media a lot. So it's a long journey, and there's a lot in it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, at one level, it's quite recent history, isn't it? And yet, at another level, the contribution of women in ordained ministry for most Anglicans is just kind of so normal and wonderful and embraced and celebrated. It's hard to think that as recently as 30, 40 years ago, we were still going through those kinds of turmoils. What do you think that experience, that journey, might have to teach us today, and how we navigate our differences as a church?
That's a good question. We live in a mixed economy around that issue and many issues.
Yeah.
And so, again, as I said in my sermon today, we need to learn how to listen, which ain't easy all the time. As I began with that interview on the radio, we had to listen to each other, but we had to in the end agree to differ. And how do we, and you as a bishop and other bishops, that holding together, that sense of unity, how do you hold unity loosely when you disagree on what for some people are fundamentals? It's tough. How do we move forward? We try and find pathways where we can listen, where we can learn, because there's a lot to learn. I have a lot to learn from those who disagree with me.
Sure.
And one of the gifts of church and being church is that I sit alongside somebody I might never otherwise get to know.
Yeah.
But if I am able to suspend judgment and listen, as our God does, listens to all of us, to them, as you said before, and to us, then we can go a long way. If we can name each other, if we can get to know each other by name, get to know each other's strengths and gifts and how God is calling each one, then we can go step by step along the way, I reckon. Maybe that's naive, but
no,
I reckon that's the path.
Well,
to
again,
find ways of listening and sharing a meal together.
Yeah. It's that sense of the primacy of relationship, again, that you touched on this morning, that God is essentially relational and creation is relational, and there's a relational aspect to our truthfulness as well, that we have to hear from each other and arrive at, move towards together.
And that's part of the richness, that's part of the tapestry of who we are as human beings and as people of God.
And of course, for Christians, God gives us a person as our way, our truth, and our life. Not an idea. Again, that lovely quote that you had from Jan Richardson, I think it was this morning, about the Trinity not being an idea to be grasped, but a mystery to kind of be dived into. A little earlier on, Susanna, when you were talking about the ministry of the cathedral, you mentioned some of the civic occasions and civic functions of its ministry and of your role as Dean. And I've experienced a couple of wonderful examples of that since I arrived, in terms of our response to some of the global catastrophes that have occurred over the last 18 months or so. How do you see this in relation to today's gospel, which reminds us of the importance of going out? And I guess if the COVID-19 restrictions have taught us anything, it's to remind us that we can't, in our kind of pre-post-Christian context, expect people to come in. We really need to take Jesus' commission seriously and go out and make those connections and build those relationships in our local communities. How do we do that as a cathedral parish? How do we do that in any kind of ministry context? It's a big question, I know.
Yeah, and there are a number of levels to it. I mean, there's the one-on-one. We all live in the community.
Yeah.
We all go to the post office. We go to the supermarket. We get petrol in our cars. So there's the one-on-one, whatever our particular ministries are, we connect with people and we build relationships. And then there's the other level of being involved. I mean, a lot of people are involved with Rotary, Lions Club, service organisations, footy, cricket. You know, it's being out there, listening and speaking your truth. So we talked about what's happening in America at the moment. How do we as a church, as Christians, respond to that? People who live in Gippsland? Good question. We need to do that, I think, ecumenically and more broadly. How do we do that? I mean, what we do and do well, I think the cathedral is liturgical stuff, but we do some of that in church, but some of that we need to get out into the city square to talk, to listen, the moment from a distance. I enjoy dance, movement, storytelling, so I run workshops in that. I lead retreats in different ways around the place. I offer quiet afternoons at the gallery and in the gardens, so that connects with one or two briefly. I'm also a spiritual direction, a spiritual companion and a supervisor, so again I meet people one-on-one in those situations and open up the more or deeper stories. It's speaking on radio, it's speaking on internet, speaking out there your truth, our truth, being open, honest, vulnerable, speaking and listening, but mostly listening.
Is that one of the strengths of our Anglican tradition, do you think, that instinct to be a church with soft edges, a kind of porous membrane, a kind of church in society tradition where that sense of the whole world being the parish is sort of innate to our spiritual DNA? Can we harness that kind of core spirituality of our Anglican tradition again in this moment, do you think?
Well, I think especially in this moment we can do that by being there, by speaking out. You know, think of Jules and Rich at 123, for example. Just about everyone in Sale knows 123 or knows something about it. And it's a ministry unit of relationship, of training, of teaching, and each person will have their own unique way of being engaged in the community. As a cathedral, for example, we've been involved with the other churches in Sale. Just made a video on of prayers for the community, which is going out online. So there's lots of different ways of doing it, I suppose.
It's a bit like what you said this morning, that lovely challenge at the end of your sermon. Who you are matters, what you do matters. We really do have to take that personal kind of responsibility, don't we, as well as the collective kind of responsibility.
Yeah. It's both and. Resonating with the Black Lives Matters, White Lives Matters, green, blue, orange, pink. People in prison, people in hospital, people who are sick, they all matter. But each of us need corporately and individually make different choices about how they make a difference in the world. You know, I gave food to a man yesterday who comes in maybe once a month, for food and so on. That's one small thing that I can do. It doesn't change the structure of our society, but it makes a difference to that one person.
It matters.
I mean, I can attend a meeting with the council to work out things. We can organise the thing at the clock tower for the massacres to talk. And I was at the hospital last week with someone who was sick, and they introduced me to the doctor and she said, "Oh, I know you. I was at the thing you organised at the clock tower for the Sri Lankan bombing. I spoke."
Yeah, it's a great example. Well, Susanna, what you do does make a difference. The ministry of the cathedral in our diocese, in our city, more broadly in the wider church, does make a difference. and it matters. And it's a very busy place, and you're a very busy person. But we're especially grateful for your time to talk this morning, and for, again, the Cathedral's ministry to us during these strange times when we felt the pain of separation, but we've been able to gather together, as you say, remotely from all parts of the diocese and around the wider church to worship together in the mother church of our diocese. So thank you again for your hospitality, and bless you for and in your ministry, Susanna.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure. It's a privilege.
And thanks, Annie, for being with us today. See you next time.